Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Al24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. A ceasefire attempt in 2 Ukrainian cities has collapsed, with Russia pushing forward with its military operation. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was welcomed in Moldova and Poland, and he emphasized on the support that the United States and its allies will offer to Ukraine and the neighboring countries, helping to flee the refugees. Visa and Mastercard announced on Saturday, March the 5th, that they were suspending the operation in Russia after the military operation in Ukraine, which will prevent cards issued by Russian banks from working abroad. Hello again and welcome. Those were today's headlines. We kick off our news from Mariupol. The humanitarian situation in Mariupol is extremely dire, with a huge displacement of people. The International Committee of the Red Cross warned, adding that many people are stranded in the shelters without food, water or electricity. Tens of thousands of refugees have streamed into Moldova, one of Europe's poorest countries, straining its social services. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was welcome in Moldova and Poland, and he emphasized on the support that the United States and its allies will offer to Ukraine and the neighboring countries, which are helping to flee the refugees. The details and the support by Sofiane Kanchouri.
On Saturday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Moldova to offer U.S. support as country grapples with an influx of Ukrainian migrants and worries of being targeted by Moscow. Blinken is expected to reassure the little country, which has been torn apart by Transnistria, pro-Russian breakaway area on Ukraine's western border. According to some commentators, the land might be utilized as staging area for Russia's military operation in Ukraine.
We've come from several days of meetings with NATO, the European Union, countries beyond the G7, and we see that support not only continued security support, humanitarian support, economic support, but that support will increase.
Dmytro Kuleba also praised the unified front's position and emphasized that if Ukraine's supporting states continue to provide weapons and supplies, the price of victory will be smaller this time.
And if our partners continue to take bold, systemic decisions to step up economic and political pressure on Ukraine, if they continue to provide us with necessary weapons, the price will be lower.
Meanwhile, in a press conference, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasized that the United States is very happy about the support which the Moldovan government offered for the Ukrainian refugees, and that the United States and its allies is ready to send more support to Moldova to accomplish its mission with Ukrainian.
In the 30 years since Moldova and the United States began diplomatic relations, we've never faced a moment as urgent and as challenging as the one that we face today. Russia's unprovoked, unwarranted war on Ukraine has kicked off a humanitarian crisis that is already having a vast effect across the region, including here in the Republic of Moldova.
Maia Sandu, Moldovan president, welcomed the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and made sure that Moldova is ready to give any help and support for nations, especially in such case. And she mentioned that Moldova welcomed the Ukrainian refugees now and later. Blinken also visited the Ukrainian border in Poland, which has taken in 800,000 Ukrainians fleeing the war, only hours before his arrival, showing support and stand of United States and its allies with Ukraine.
And to have a clear idea, let's follow these slides. Russia assaults Ukrainian cities of Mariupol and Volnovka after announcing a ceasefire. President Zelensky said that almost 10,000 Russian soldiers killed. Ukrainian's foreign minister tells his U.S. counterpart his country needs fighter jets and air defense systems and said that NATO's refusal to implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine is a sign of weakness. Mastercard and Visa announced they are suspending operation in Russia. International Monetary Fund warns that the serious global economic effect of the war in Ukraine would be more devastating if the conflict escalates. The World Health Organization said it had 6 verified reports of attacks on healthcare that caused 6 deaths and 11 injuries. Ukraine's military commanded that more than 11,000 Russian troops have been killed since the Russian special military operation started, whereas Ukrainian police said that there was persistent Russian shelling and air raids in the northeast Kharkiv region, reporting many casualties, while the UN World Health Organization said there had been several operations targeting Ukrainian healthcare facilities. Russian military action on Ukraine is ongoing, with Russian forces moving on major population centers, including Mariupol in the southeast and the capital Kiev. As the conflict moves into major cities, Russia has started to deploy brutal siege tactics like using cluster munitions and bombing civilian infrastructure. The details in this report by Usama Ayadi.
As the Russian military operation enters its 11th day, the situation on the field is advancing as power continues to be the dominant language of the conflict on the Ukrainian territories. Russia has resumed its operations on the strategic port city of Mariupol after a temporary ceasefire failed, with allegations of violations by both sides. Russian military is repeatedly targeting military infrastructure of Ukraine as a part of the plan to their military operation.
Dear comrades, I want to say that the special military operation is proceeding strictly according to schedule, according to plan. All set goals are successfully achieved.
Analysts say Russia is currently preparing the ground in Ukraine's cities by trying to raise as much infrastructure as possible by air in order to make the ground advancement to the capital Kiev easier for its ground forces, which are massively stepping forward to Ukraine's main city.
The Russians keep bearing devastating losses on the ground, and I cannot understand how mothers, wives, and daughters of these Russian soldiers bear this pain, seeing how President Putin sends more and more of their beloved ones to Ukraine.
Russia is also attempting to cut off resources to key cities. In Mariupol, a city of more than 400,000 people, water, heat, and electricity have been shut off for days throughout a ferocious Russian bombardment campaign. According to military analysts, these military operations are likely to be stepped up from early days of the conflict, when Russia likely did not use these higher-scale artillery fires and airstrikes and those sorts of assets because they expected a quick victory, which hasn't occurred, and didn't want the portrayal in international and domestic Russian media of destroying Ukrainian cities.
A ceasefire attempt into Ukrainian cities has collapsed, with Russia pushing forward with its military operation.
At 11:45 a.m., the Russian Federation started to shell the town of Volnovakha using heavy artillery. As you know, starting from 9 a.m., we had a preliminary agreement to create 2 humanitarian corridors in Volnovakha and Mariupol. I can confirm the fact that a Russian violated the agreement, in which the Red Cross was an intermediary.
Humanitarian corridors must work today in Mariupol and Volnovakha to save people, women, children, and the elderly, to give food and medicine to those who remain. Almost 10,000 Russian soldiers killed.
In a video address, President Volodymyr Zelensky urged Ukrainians to go on the offensive against Russian forces to fight on Saturday. Zelensky spoke with U.S. lawmakers and requested harsher sanctions against Russia. Zelensky has been delivering impassionate addresses to Ukrainians since Russia's military operation in Ukraine began on February 24th.
It is a special heroism to protest when your city is occupied, even temporarily, when you don't have a weapon, and in response you receive a gunshot, and you don't run when you don't have an armor. While an armored personnel carrier is coming at you, you do not move aside. This is why the occupation is temporary. It is artificial. Our people are Ukrainians. Do not retreat. Do not give up. Do not stop the resistance.
Не здаються, не зупиняють свого спротиву.
In the same line of thoughts, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky posted a tweet in which he thanked the billionaire Elon Musk for his support and for sending Starlink systems for Ukraine. Later, a video was posted on Ukrainian president's Instagram. The video showed him in the middle of a video call with Elon Musk as he invited him to come to his country, and the billionaire replied that he can't wait to come. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warns the coming days are likely to be worse in Ukraine, saying that NATO's responsibility it is to ensure that the conflict does not spread beyond Ukraine.
The days to come are likely to be worse, with more death, more suffering, and more destruction. We are not part of this conflict, and we have a responsibility to ensure it does not escalate and spread beyond Ukraine, because that would be even more devastating and more dangerous.
The meeting called by Ukraine's Foreign Minister praised Kiev soldiers for their progress against Russia, saying Ukraine is bleeding, but it has not collapsed and stands with both feet on the ground.
The Russians keep bearing devastating losses on the ground, and I cannot understand how mothers, wives, and daughters of these Russian soldiers bear this pain, seeing how President Putin sends more and more of their beloved ones to Ukraine. Ukraine is bleeding, but Ukraine has not fallen and stands both feet on the ground.
President von der Leyen stated that she is very glad to be in Madrid and that he is a key partner for her, and that she is in Spain to prepare with the Spanish Prime Minister the informal summit that they are going to have next week.
One thing is very clear. The European Union must get rid of the dependency of Russian oil, gas, and coal. And for that, we have to diversify the supply. We have to get better at energy efficiency, and we have to massively invest in renewables. Because this is a strategic investment in our security of supply, but also in the health of our planet.
From Paris to New York, Rome, or even Zurich, thousands of demonstrators again took the streets of large Western cities on Saturday to protest against the Russian military operation of Ukraine. Let's follow this report.
Last weekend, hundreds of thousands of people with blue and yellow colors had already marched in Europe, from Prague to Berlin in the US, to denounce the Russian operations and express their fear of an extension of the conflict. In New York, a few thousands of people gathered in Times Square with sunflowers, emblems of Ukraine, demanding the US, NATO or European Union intervene to stop the so-called war.
Our brave soldiers fighting right now on the ground, but the major attack that caused damage to civilians and dying of just regular people and kids is from the air, from the missiles that's coming from the air, and we're asking to protect the sky because our soldiers can protect the territory on the ground, but we can do nothing with the missiles and bombs that's coming from the sky.
Some protesters were Ukrainian Americans, while others were just New Yorkers who wanted to express their disapproval with Russia's military activity by waving signs for hours, demanding for the end of the so-called war and the imposition of a no-fly zone over Ukraine. A protester came to Times Square after leaving his parents in Ukraine to demand that Western nations close the skies over his homeland.
I do believe that if US or NATO or European Union is going to close the sky, is going to help from just regular people from dying. Regular people, not army, because Russia is just bombing everybody. They don't care.
In tears, a 38-year-old Ukrainian who has lived in the US for 6 years denounced Russia. Protests in favor of Ukraine erupted around the world and around the US on Saturday, with similar gatherings in Miami and Los Angeles.
Visa and Mastercard announced on Saturday, March the 5th, that they were suspending their operations in Russia after the military operation in Ukraine, which will prevent cards issued by Russian banks from working abroad and foreign cards from working in Russia. Due to the unprecedented nature of the current conflict and the uncertain economic environment, we have decided to suspend our service network in Russia, Mastercard said in a statement, adding that it would continue to pay its approximately 200 employees in the country. Its competitor Visa simultaneously said in another statement that it will work with customers and partners in Russia to cease all Visa transactions in the coming days. The US and its allies have retaliated against Russia's special military operation in Ukraine with some unprecedented sanctions in the last week. Rather from intervening militarily, they have retaliated by attacking Russia's economy. The details in this report.
Over the course of the week, the sanctions have become more severe. What started out as supposedly limited package of measures aimed at isolating the two breakaway Ukrainian regions of Donetsk and Luhansk on February 21st has quickly developed into the most extensive set of multilateral economic sanctions ever imposed on a major global economy. By taking such drastic measures so fast, the Biden administration and its foreign allies sought to inflict costs on Russia that would push it to reassess its military operation in Ukraine before it became too lengthy. Even as the extent and severity of the punishments have increased, these efforts have so far been fruitless. Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has showed no evidence of changing his mind. The hope from the US and its allies appears to be that his calculus, or that of the people around him, might alter as the implications for the Russian people become more severe. Putin's move hit Russia's economy, crippling the ruble. However, several companies took action and decided to pull out from Russia. Many big tech companies expressed support of Ukraine, abandoning projects happening in Russia or stopped selling their articles.
BP said they would pull out of oil and gas investment in Russia worth billions. ExxonMobil abandoned the $4 billion oil and gas project. Meanwhile, Shell ditched its stakes and left major gas project in Siberia and the Gidan Peninsula.
Apple announced that it was stopping all sales of iPhones, MacBooks, and other Apple products to Russia, limited access to Apple Pay, and banned Russian propaganda apps.
Volkswagen stopped its operations and production in Russia. General Motors, Ford, BMW, Volvo, and Mercedes-Benz stopped selling cars.
Big planes manufacturer companies such as Boeing and Airbus suspended their building projects and the supply of parts and maintenance for their planes on the Russian territory.
IKEA stopped its operations in Russia and Belarus. Fashion giant H&M closed its stores and stopped new orders during the week. ASOS and Boo made similar moves. Nike and IKEA closed stores.
UPS, DHL, and FedEx stopped their delivery service to Russia and Ukraine amid the military operation. Sea-mail delivery companies such as Maersk and MSC, Mediterranean shipping companies, stopped cargo shipments to Russia.
Disney and Warner Media paused the release of new movies.
And Norway's $1.3 trillion sovereign wealth fund said it would divest shares of 47 Russian companies and Russian government bonds, and the list goes on.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky announces that he has again spoken on the phone with his American counterpart Joe Biden to discuss American financial support for Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. Zelensky said, as part of the constant dialogue, I had another conversation with the President of the United States. The agenda included the issues of security, financial support for Ukraine, and the continuation of sanctions against Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Saturday that the Western sanctions on Russia were unlike to a declaration of war and warned that any attempt to impose a no-fly zone in Ukraine would lead to catastrophic consequences for the world. Zara Farjani on what follow.
Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered a warning to the West over the sanctions imposed on Russia, warning that measures designed to cripple his country's economy were as similar as an act of war.
We hear now that we need to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. It is impossible to do it over Ukraine itself. It is possible to do only from the neighboring states. But any movement in this direction will be considered participation in an armed conflict on the part of the country from which territorial threats to our military personnel are being made.
Ukraine and Western countries have dismissed this as a baseless pretext for the military operation he launched on February 24th and have imposed a sweeping range of sanctions aimed at isolating Moscow. Putin said any attempt by another power to impose a no-fly zone in Ukraine would be considered by Russia to be a step into the military conflict. Putin dismissed concern that some sort of martial law or emergency situation could be declared in Russia.
Martial law should only be introduced in accordance with the law, by order of the President, and it should be confirmed by the Council of the Federation. In cases where there is external aggression, including areas where fighting is taking place, we are not living it at the moment, and hopefully we won't.
His intervention, in which he hinted the conflict could soon spread beyond Ukraine unless the West changes course, came as Moscow broke a ceasefire agreement to allow Ukrainian civilians to flee after 10 days of bombing and devastation.
Russia has demanded for reaching U.S. guarantees that sanctions on Moscow would not harm Russian cooperation with Iran. Is not constructive for talks between Tehran and global powers to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, arrives at Vienna airport on his return from Tehran and welcomes the good negotiations, saying that they have been able to agree on a joint declaration that will guide our steps in the coming months.
If Iran cooperates, we have a good process. Maybe we don't even need to get to June. If Iran does not cooperate, mind you, it's not the board. I would consider that. Of course, the board has its competencies, and I don't dispute them. But I, as inspector, if I may say it like this, as Director General of the IAEA, would not cease to put questions and continue the process.
At least 1,700 foreign students are trapped into the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy as shelling from the Russian army continues for a 10th day, and now it is 11th day after humanitarian corridors failed. Students have been relying on the hostel supplies of food as well as the university stocks, but water has been cut in the city for 3 days, forcing them to melt snow to drink and to cook with.
Hi, we are students of Sumy State University. We are residing right now in first hostel. There is no electricity right now in a hostel, and there is no water available for us. So we would like to request government to give us some advisory how we can evacuate from here. Even we are ready to walk miles and miles away if you want us to, because first of all, give us some priority of safety, and then we would like to evacuate as soon as possible, because we may not die with this war zone, but we will die with scarcity of water and food. So please, 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 we all request to evacuate us as soon as possible. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat. Jai Hind!
The World Health Organization said it had confirmed severe attacks on healthcare facilities in Ukraine, causing numerous deaths and injuries. Attacks on healthcare facilities or workers break medical neutrality and are a violation of international humanitarian law, said the World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus on Twitter on Sunday. The humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, worsened by 1.37 million people, have already taken refuge abroad since the Russian special military operation on February 24th has begun. And according to the UN, there are more than 1 million displaced people in the country. This exodus is arousing strong mobilization, particularly in neighboring states such as Polish Ukraine. More details in this report about the situation.
Ever since the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine last week, neighboring Polish states have been mobilized to collect warm clothes, food and water for refugees crossing into Poland. At the border crossing in the town of Przemysl, the crowd took over the stations to shelter women and children to the west after heartbreaking farewells.
Here is a transit hub. We are looking for solutions so that the Ukrainian refugees can continue their journey.
Since the outbreak of the crisis, almost 800,000 refugees have crossed into Poland. Hundreds of cars stand along a narrow road, waiting for the arrival of more refugees from Ukraine, whose lives have been disrupted by the Russian military operation.
The number of buses is really huge. A lot of people want to flee Ukraine.
Individuals from all across the country have taken to the border to offer refugees free transport and accommodation. Groups of volunteers at each border crossing welcome new arrivals with food, tea and water.
Same, but as I've seen, there are a lot of people from Switzerland, Italy, Germany, French people who are trying to help somehow, even if it's just a little, but if a lot of people do just a little, it gets more, so.
Poland, a conservative country which several years back refused to accept the resettlement of refugees from other European Union countries, is now at the front line of humanitarian efforts for refugees fleeing Ukraine.
To this end, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a reminder for our main headlines. A ceasefire attempt in 2 Ukrainian cities has collapsed, with Russia pushing forward with its military operation. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was welcomed in Moldova and Poland, and he emphasized on the support that the United States and its allies will offer to Ukraine and the neighboring countries helping to flee the refugees. Visa and Mastercard announced on Saturday, March the 5th, that they were suspending their operations in Russia after the military operation in Ukraine, which will prevent cards issued by Russian banks from working abroad. That's all the news we have got for now. Further details in the coming bulletins. Thank you so much and have a blessed evening.